After 4 days of launching the war, Russia had approached the gates of Kyiv and encountered some difficulties due to fierce resistance. Now they were preparing more forces for the final assault on the last gate leading to Kyiv. On February 28th, the 64th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade advanced along the M06 highway to reinforce the Irpin direction in order to decisively defeat this defense line. They fell into an ambush by the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade of Ukraine. The Russian convoy was attacked unexpectedly and suffered heavy losses. Some tanks and armored vehicles were set on fire. Ukraine applied hit-and-run tactics, making it impossible for the Russian army to counterattack effectively. That same evening, Alexei Arestovich announced that 200 vehicles on the highway had been destroyed. A gross exaggeration, but it proved to the West that Ukraine was still fighting fiercely. In the areas where government troops withdrew, local militia groups and civilians also organized to break into remaining armories to equip themselves, make Molotov cocktails, and conduct guerrilla warfare against the lightly protected Russian transport convoys. Notably, on February 28th, the deputy commander of the 41st Combined Arms Army of Russia, Major General Andrei Sukovetsky, was killed by a Ukrainian sniper. At the beginning of March, after many attacks, Russia had captured favorable positions and consolidated them firmly on the Irpin front, but still could not capture the town despite all its efforts. With an absolute advantage in the air, they continuously organized bombing raids on the town where Ukrainian military positions were located, causing many humanitarian disasters for civilians. However, this was also ineffective, as it only allowed the Russian infantry to capture half of the town. The two sides began to fall into a stalemate. Ukraine continuously organized ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, causing significant casualties to Russia. Meanwhile, with the view that they had plenty of ammunition, Russia organized shelling and missile attacks along with bombing raids day and night, causing heavy casualties to the enemy's defense forces. On March 3rd, in order to break the stalemate, Ukraine launched an attack on the northern direction of Bucha, combined with a counterattack in Irpin. It seemed that the attack had brought positive results by pushing back the 64th Motor Rifle Brigade and the Chechen battalions of Russia. This seriously threatened the main attack prong of the 76th Air Assault Division, forcing these units to retreat to avoid being surrounded. However, the Russian army was still very strong, completely superior and overwhelming in artillery, so it did not take long for Russia to regain the initiative on the battlefield. By March 5th, a new Russian attack had regained control of most of Bucha. In an effort to open a path to Kyiv, about 50 Russian tanks, armored vehicles, and pontoon bridge carriers fell into an ambush by 20 Ukrainian local militiamen. Among them were 1 policeman, 2 regular soldiers, and 5 veterans. The rest were armed civilians. They organized an ambush at the Novish shopping center, located between Irpin and Bucha. The surprise ambush resulted in 2 infantry fighting vehicles being set on fire. The Ukrainian militia group also had 1 person injured by return fire. The convoy continued to advance and clashed with 70 soldiers of the 8th Special Forces Regiment of Ukraine, equipped with 2 armored vehicles at the Irpin brick factory. Because they were the defending side and had set up obstacles on the road, the Ukrainian Special Forces could still resist and block the advance of the convoy. A group of Russian armored vehicles circled behind the brick factory to launch a surprise rear attack. But this tactic was discovered by Ukraine, and the two sides continued to fall into a stalemate. It was not until the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade of Ukraine received the exact coordinates and began shelling that the Russian armored convoy began to retreat. The bridge they had crossed when they advanced had been destroyed by the Ukrainian militia group, trapping the convoy in the town. 2 Ukrainian Su-24 attack aircraft attacked from the air, and there were continuous shelling attacks on the trapped convoy on the road. Of the 50 tanks and armored vehicles that entered Irpin, only a few returned. The Ukrainian side also lost 1 Su-24, and 2 pilots were killed by Russian air defense fire. The incidents of local militias without insignia and military uniforms attacking the Russian army occurred continuously, making it difficult for Russia to distinguish between civilians and local militias. This could also be the cause of the Bucha massacre, which caused much controversy between the parties. The fierce fighting pushed civilians into a serious humanitarian disaster. The Ukrainian government had to evacuate 20,000 civilians from Irpin and Bucha. During the evacuation and supply of civilians, the mayor of Hostomel was killed by Russian fire on March 5th. While at a stalemate and shifting attention to Irpin, in Moscow, Russia unexpectedly organized a river crossing. On March 6th, the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade and Spetsnaz Special Forces crossed the Irpin River from the north and attacked the town of Moscow, which was defended by a company of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine under the command of Captain Roman Kovalenko. This company was overwhelmed in terms of numbers and artillery firepower. After fierce resistance but suffering 2 heavy casualties, they destroyed the bridge and retreated to the edge of the town. Immediately, the Georgian Legion of Mercenaries was sent to reinforce and help Kovalenko's company block the advance of the Russian army. On March 8th, when Russia had completed the establishment of a pontoon bridge and was transferring more troops and equipment across the river, Ukraine destroyed the dam at Daimir. A large amount of water flooded the newly captured positions of Russia, and at the same time disrupted the transfer of more troops and armored vehicles. On the other side, Ukraine is not doing much better, because communications were attacked and paralyzed by Russia. They had to send messengers like in ancient times. Drones were neutralized by electronic warfare jamming. Artillery shells were depleted. The ratio of artillery shells fired was 20-1 in favor of Russia. Kovalenko's company had requested to retreat because they were fighting in desperation with heavy casualties. However, the order of the commander-in-chief of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrski, was to fight to the last man. He also explained that behind Moscow was Kyiv. There was no defense line behind them. On March 10th, the situation became even more tense when somehow Russia had gathered a company of tanks and crossed the river without Ukraine's knowledge. The incident was only discovered when a local farmer reported it to the Ukrainian army. Immediately, Ukraine shelled the forest. The secondary explosions that occurred confirmed that this presence was true. At the same time, in Chernihiv, the 6th Tank Regiment and the 55th Motor Rifle Brigade, after many days of siege and attack, could not subdue the 1st Tank Brigade of Ukraine. Now seeing the opportunity in Moscow, they advanced to join forces, leaving only a small part to continue to hold down the Ukrainian troops. In Sumy, the 2nd Motorized Infantry Division also received a similar order. It seemed that the Russian army's general staff had seen victory after many tiring days. Immediately, the last strategic reserve unit of Ukraine, the 81st Air Assault Brigade, was thrown into the battle to counterattack the Russian army in Moscow. Ukraine had to risk moving another battalion of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade from Irpin to Velika Demerka to block the attack direction from Chernihiv. This battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Roman Darmarai, ambushed on the road from Velika Demerka to Brovary. The 6th Tank Regiment of Russia advancing here was discovered by local people and reported to the army, so the ambush was perfect. When the tank convoy entered the ambush, a projectile from an NLAW anti-tank gun hit the leading T-90. Immediately, the regiment deployed tanks on both sides of the road to prepare for battle. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian army chose the right ambush location because both sides of the road were muddy, making it difficult to move, becoming living targets for the Ukrainian army to fire upon. After successfully retreating, the regiment had to leave behind the wrecks of 17 tanks and 3 armored vehicles, along with their comrades. The regiment commander, Colonel Andrei Zakharov, was seriously injured and died that evening. On March 19th, another surprise attack was carried out, but using the same old Ukrainian ambush tactics, a leading tank was shot down, forcing the attack to be abandoned. Anyway, to be fair, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine is truly a strong unit. Meanwhile, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade in western Ukraine was also sent to Lukyanivka to block the 2nd Motorized Infantry Division. The situation began to stabilize for Ukraine. They launched a counterattack on Moshun, pushing the trapped Russian troops back to the riverbank. By mid-March, the newly formed 112th Territorial Defense Brigade was also sent to Moshun to help Ukraine gain a numerical advantage. They launched large-scale attacks on the trapped Russian troops. Russian special forces had to abandon their equipment and swim across the river. But the river was raging from the destroyed dam, so not all of them were lucky. In Chernihiv, the 1st Tank Brigade of Ukraine and local militias continuously ambushed Russian logistics convoys, causing serious logistical shortages. Therefore, a part of the 6th Tank Regiment and the 55th Motor Rifle Brigade of Russia, with a force of 750 men, carried out a major battle to advance into the village of Lukashivka. 7 tanks and 19 infantry fighting vehicles leading the attack formation were intercepted and shelled, so the losses were quite large. The battle here again fell into a stalemate. In Makariv on March 8th, the 14th Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine had a major battle with the 37th Motor Rifle Brigade of Russia. After a bloody battle, Ukraine was forced to withdraw its unit due to heavy losses. However, their reconnaissance reported that the Russian army was still advancing in pursuit. 3 T-64s were ambushed on the Russian advance route. When the leading T-72 of the formation entered the position, all 3 T-64s suddenly opened fire, setting it on fire. Some of the following vehicles were also damaged and dispersed to avoid the fire. Russia began to call for artillery support, thinking they had encountered a major ambush. After confirming that Russia only had one T-72 and it had been set on fire, one T-64 switched to fragmentation shells and moved to a more favorable position, firing continuously and destroying 5 more military vehicles. A Russian soldier used an anti-tank gun to hit the T-64, setting it on fire and killing the 3-man crew. The other 2 vehicles immediately retreated. In March, Mechanized changed hands many times after the 2 sides continuously attacked each other, because it was also a direct route to Kyiv. Overall, on all fronts, the period in mid-March was when both sides were at a stalemate. Russia still maintained the siege of Kyiv from 3 sides but could not break through any of Ukraine's defense positions. In contrast, Ukraine still completely controlled Kyiv but was only capable of organizing ambush battles, unable to launch an attack to create a turning point. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. The 64-kilometer-long convoy of Russian tanks, armored vehicles, and logistics was continuously ambushed and attacked by local militias, leading to them having to disperse into neighboring towns. At this point, it was clear that Russia's blitzkrieg tactic had not been achieved. The US, UK, and NATO, after witnessing what Ukraine had shown, began to pump more javelins, NLAWs, Stingers, and artillery shells to Kyiv. Ukraine equipped them for small guerrilla teams to fight in a hit-and-run style, causing great damage to Russian armored units. The artillery battle continued, although Russia fired 7 times more artillery shells, but the Ukrainian side had a reconnaissance system made up of local civilians, plus they used UAVs more often than Russia during this period, which also somewhat balanced the artillery power. This was extremely important, especially in destroying pontoon bridges in time to prevent Russian troops from crossing the river. The stalemate began to be broken when, on March 22nd, Ukraine saw that the time had come for the Russian army to weaken and began a large-scale counteroffensive on all fronts. A part of the 8th Special Forces Regiment was sent to reinforce Mechanized, supporting the 14th Mechanized Brigade's counterattack to push the Russian army out of the town. The Belarusian Mercenary Regiment fighting for Ukraine was sent to Velika Dimerka, reinforcing the 1st Battalion, 72nd Mechanized Brigade. They organized a counterattack and completely recaptured the town of Velika Dimerka on March 31st. Meanwhile, in Lukyanivka, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, with a limited force, launched a surprise counterattack on the formation of the 2nd Motorized Infantry Division, due to their familiarity with the terrain and the element of surprise. This unit caused great damage to the Russian forces, forcing them to withdraw from Lukyanivka on March 26th. On March 29th, President Vladimir Putin announced the withdrawal of troops from the capital Kyiv in order to create conditions for negotiations with Ukraine. Unlike the hasty attack, the Russian army withdrew in an orderly and organized manner, slowly, carefully planting mines in all the areas they passed through to avoid a major pursuit by Ukraine. Russia completed the withdrawal, and the campaign officially ended on April 2, 2022. After the Russian withdrawal, Ukraine accused the 64th Motor Rifle Brigade of Russia of causing the Bucha massacre, which killed 458 civilians, most of whom were women, the elderly, and children. President Zelensky sent photos of children shot in the head, tortured to death, to European and US officials. Meanwhile, Russia accused Ukraine of staging the incident and giving Russia a bad name. They also accused the Ukrainian army of using civilians as human shields when deploying artillery systems near residential buildings, making it impossible for Russia to retaliate strongly. Both sides did not announce casualties, however. According to neutral sources, the numbers are horrific, especially since Ukraine also had to bear civilian casualties due to the chaotic firepower of both sides. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian mothers will never see their children return, for the great ideal of patriotism or as a tool for the ambitions of the ruling class. For whatever reason, blood is still shed. This brutal war continues and leaves sorrow for millions of families. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This is completely free, but it will be a huge motivation for us to continue making more quality videos for you.